My grandfather used to tell us all sorts of stories about the fair folk. Everything from stories of the seelie and unseelie courts and the wild hunt to pukas and water horses. All manner of creatures who inhabit the world with us. And he said they weren't just stories, and that he was really teaching us the rules about living alongside the fair folk. There were no gossamer-winged beauties granting wishes in these stories. No sparkling fairy castles, no benevolent gentry helping poor souls who had stumbled into their realm by walking widdershins around the kirkyard. These were serious and sometimes very dark. The main lesson I took away from them was that they are different from us. Not worse, not better, not evil, but very different. So you had better pay attention. We took these stories seriously. We didn't talk about them except to pass the stories on. And there were a few little things we did that were a direct result of understanding the rules for dealing with the Fae. For example, when things would go missing in my house, we put out bread, milk, and butter the next day. And we would always find whatever we had lost. I was told that this was a good neighbor gift. It's not a bribe or a payment. That distinction is very important. My grandmother did it, my mother did it, I do it, and now my children do it too. Works every time. When people ask me if I believe in fairies, I tell them, better to be safe than sorry. I used to live in Blanco, Texas. On the land, there was a natural spring which 3/4 of the year flowed out from the rocks in the earth. There was a small, shady grove of trees that was always about 10 degrees cooler than any other place in the yard, and tufts of bright green mosses dotted and patched the ground. The house had a multi-level deck that had several wide but shallow steps, maybe 3 feet wide and 4 inches high, and 5 layers to the deck. There was even a tree growing up through the highest level of the deck. It was nice, and we enjoyed living away from the city where it was cooler and more peaceful. On the night of the incident, my husband was home from Korea on his mid-tour leave. And while we were sleeping soundly in bed one night, something happened. I don't know if it was an unfamiliar sound or smell, but I was instantly awake. I first listened to see if one of my children was perhaps in the kitchen, but heard only a silent house. My husband Bill was next to me, still sleeping, but for some reason, every hair on my body was standing up. The bedroom window was over my side of the bed and was just above the deck stairs. There was a cool breeze, and as I sat up in bed, I started to hear something. At first, I thought it was night birds or squirrels, but edging closer to the window, I could hear scraping on the wooden stairs. Rats, maybe? I moved closer to the window to look outside, but my heart began to pound. Out of nowhere, I remembered what my grandfather had told me. Don't look at them, and don't ever, ever speak. So I scrunched down so that I was just under the window and listened. I could clearly hear tiny voices speaking. These were not squirrels or rats. I was hearing a language. Suddenly, I felt cold as stone and my body went rigid. I had a feeling that I was in the presence of a predator, but it was much more than that. Whatever was on the porch was not human, but it was intelligent. There were two distinct speakers, and the sound they made was lilting, musical, a sound I have never been able to reproduce. I felt it in the very core of me, right in my belly, that I was in the presence of something ancient, something not to be made light of, and I was terrified. My heart was pounding, and I had an odd thought. Can they smell me? Do they know I'm here, afraid? It's interesting how fear sharpens your senses. I didn't dare move a muscle. Listening to them as they made their way along, I was surprised to hear occasional laughter, or what I think was laughter. It was a curious sound, like the purest crystal, and something oddly out of sync with the world, and yet not. I know that sounds silly, but that's the only way I can describe it. I kept silent and resisted the urge to look as they made their way up the deck steps, carrying on a conversation not meant for me or any human to hear. I tried to create a picture in my mind of what I was hearing. Tiny footsteps on the wood, faint scuffling as a small body was pulled up one and then the other stair, all the while talking in the beautiful language that made me long to hear more. I actually felt a visceral longing, and even though I was afraid, I was drawn to listen to them. I thought, they can't be very heavy because of the way they sounded on the steps, maybe 6 or 8 inches tall? And I thought they sounded thin. I can't explain why I thought that, but there you are. Barely breathing, I listened to them move further away from the window, up another set of steps, and their footfalls pattered across the deck, until I thought I heard a solid, dry pliff sound of 2 small somethings landing in leaves and rustling on the ground at the other side of the deck. Their voices faded, and then there were only the ordinary sounds of a Texas hill country night. Crickets, the wind in the trees, and the spring faintly splashing. Then I did look out the window, but there is nothing on this earth that would have made me go outside. I checked on the kids, no problem there. I woke up my husband, but when he asked me what was wrong, I just sat there. I couldn't think of a way to say what I had just experienced without sounding certifiable. He rolled over and went back to sleep. The next day, I went out to see if there were any footprints or evidence of what I'd heard the night before, but I didn't find a thing. After that, I would wake up in the middle of the night sometimes. I'd sit quietly and strain to listen, but never heard anything out of the ordinary. We're a military family, and there is enough Irish on my mother's side that we even speak a little Irish. I'm familiar with and speak a little of 5 languages. I can tell the difference between Mandarin and Cantonese. I know what language sounds like even if I don't speak it. There is no doubt in my mind that what I heard was language, but I can't tell you what it was. I've never heard anything like it. It was as clear as crystal, but it sounded like parts were missing, or like I wasn't hearing all of it. Looking back, I think maybe some of it was in tones that were maybe too high to hear. Listening to it, I was reminded of the way written Sanskrit looks. It's so beautiful, and if you aren't a native speaker, many of the concepts are just not teachable. What I heard was like that. A lilting sound filled with emotion and music and heartbreakingly beautiful to hear. I can't describe it any better than that. This happened back in 2007, after just returning back from a tour in Iraq serving in the US Army. I had moved back home with my parents for a period till I got back on my feet. So, one morning I was sleeping and having a pleasant dream. I can't remember all of the dream, I just felt it was pleasant. The part I do remember, I was lying on my back looking up at a beautiful blue cloudy sky. And suddenly I felt something moving around on my thigh. I tried to sit up and see what it was and noticed I couldn't move. I was restricted to only looking skyward at the blue sky. I started to panic from not being able to move, and then the sky was suddenly filled with this monstrous brown spider stepping over me. All the while, I could feel this movement on my right thigh. The moment the spider appeared overhead, I became even more frightened, but I somehow realized I was in a dream. I then forced myself to wake. So I woke up, thankful that it was all just a dream, and I noticed something unusual. My parents' pet cat would always sleep next to me, and he seemed to not be in my bed near me. Then I realized there was this slight movement on my upper right thigh, just like in my dream. I didn't immediately panic, as my parents live in the country, and at first I thought maybe it was a bug or a mouse moving around. I was wishing that the house cat was around at that moment. Slowly, I then pulled up the blanket that covered me to view what was crawling on me. To my complete shock, there, knelt down on my upper thigh, was a small creature in a jet black one-piece jumpsuit. The being's head was rather large compared to the rest of its body, and it was a sandy brown hue. It wasn't very tall, maybe 7 inches in height, knelt down. I couldn't see any facial features as the being was facing away from me. As I started to realize what was happening, I almost jumped out of bed, screaming for my parents like a little kid. After my parents got up and came into my room to see what I was shouting about, we looked around, but the little being had vanished. I told my parents about what happened, and they were very supportive. I've thought a lot about that night since then. I speculate that this being was sedating me and causing me to dream so it could do whatever it was doing. Awakening must have been unplanned as I saw it. I often wonder what might have happened if I hadn't have woken up. I don't know, but I have a strong feeling that whatever it was, it wouldn't have been good. This past winter, I was having a bit of a rough patch, feeling pretty down. I went up to bed one night. My husband was home, but he was staying up because he works a night shift. So I was lying in bed on my side with my eyes open, yet to fall asleep. And I saw 2 creatures at the side of my bed, both looking directly at me, that I can only describe as goblins. They were no taller than an average nightstand, and the closest I could come to describing them would be the word gargoyle. They were there for a blink of an eye, and then they weren't. They had been right there, but I didn't feel like I could reach out and touch one, nor did I think they could touch me, thank goodness. I sort of suspect that it was like a veil being lifted between two worlds, just for a moment. They were there, and I was there, but it was just a glimpse through a window that neither of us could pass through. Almost as weird as seeing them at all was my reaction. I'm a pretty nervous person, easily frightened. I don't even like to watch scary movies. But I wasn't scared. I didn't feel like they could do me any physical harm, and I wasn't even alarmed enough to run downstairs and tell my husband. I just laid there thinking about it for a while, and then went to sleep. I've considered that maybe I was asleep or partially asleep without realizing it, but I don't really believe it when I try to tell myself that. I think they may have been there either because they were drawn to the negative emotions I'd been experiencing, or possibly they were the cause of those emotions. I don't know. My rational mind wants to push the whole thing away, but something deep down in me seems to insist they were real. And that someday they'll be back. I dread to think why. Back in the early 90s, I had gone out late to hang out with some friends of mine at various clubs in DuPont Circle. We'd been club hopping for a bit, trying to find where the real party was going on. But due to my advancement in age, I was getting plumb tuckered out. Finally, I gave up the night as a younger spring chickens venture, and not one for an old fogey such as myself. I bid my friends a good night, and I began my walk back home. Since my home is about a few blocks from where I just called it a night, I figured a nice, quiet, jaunty walk would do me fine. Besides, it would take me past the DuPont Circle fountain. So I get to the fountain around 5 a.m. or so. There is not a soul around me. All is well, and the fountain is doing its fountain thing, spitting water and dribbling it down the sides, looking all magical and whatnot. I sat there and played with the water some, just enjoying the night. Now, as for that not another soul around thing I mentioned earlier, well, that is when the night got weird. There was this kid standing about 5 feet from where I was sitting along the edge of the fountain. I mean, where the hell did this kid come from? I sure as hell did not see him anywhere in the park. So this kid was either one world-class ninja, or he just ghosted up on the spot from wherever ninja ghost kids come from. It scared the hell out of me, and I told the kid as much. The kid just stood there, staring at me. At first, the surprise of being snuck up on was still on me, but as it wore off, I began to notice some things. Odd things about this strange kid. He had to be around 8 or 9, just skinny and small, wearing clothes from the late 1800s, like when kids wore hard to lace up boots every day because sneakers hadn't come out yet. His clothes were really old, and so was the toy he was holding. An old-fashioned sailboat that was popular around that time period. His shorts were black and his shoes were black, so the skin of his legs were in extreme contrast to his apparel. His skin was chalk white. I finally noticed his face and his eyes, and that is when the deep terror wave hit me. This kid had eyes like black marbles. solid black orbs in a young cherub face. I was stammering at this point, kind of glued to the spot, till the freaky little bastard asked me a question. "Hey, mister, will you help me with my boat?" he said, and his voice sounded like it came out of a coffee can. I managed to reply, no, I have to get home. Where are your parents?" But the kid just fidgeted a bit and repeated the same question as before, but with more assertiveness. "Hey, mister, will you help me with my boat?" Now, I was terrified at this moment and backed away. And this kid stares at me with these shark eyes, cold and dead-looking, that still seemed to convey cruel intelligence and a hunger. I felt like this kid, or whatever it was, had been digging a hole into my soul with that evil fear vibe he was giving off. I felt like it was emanating from him, or it. I shouted at him to stay away from me. The kid's brows furrowed as I speed-walked my ass out of there. I did not know what was coming next, and I did not want to know. As I power-walked away, I ventured to look back. And what I saw made me burst into a full run. There were 5 more of them standing on either side of this kid, like some hellish pack of wolves. But the kid I had encountered had gone all black, like Vanta black. And I just ran. In the time it took me to walk away from and turn to look to see if he had begun to follow me, more of his kind popped out of the same nowhere that the kid came from. I do not know what those things were, but they were not human. Those abominations were anything but human, and I hope I never face one of them again. 'Cause they hunt in packs, I think. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to the subscribers who sent me their stories for this one. All the stories but one in this video were subscriber stories, so I was really excited for this video. The other was submitted by a Reddit user. The link to that story is in the description. I've collected a bunch more true scary fairy stories, so I've got some really good videos coming up for you guys, including a collaboration, so make sure to check back in with me often. I'm also planning a not-so-scary true fairy stories video for all the pleasant stories about fairy encounters you guys have been sending me. So please do keep sending the fairy stories in, whether they're scary or not. And if I don't get to them right away, don't worry, because it will happen, I promise. In the meantime, please like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.